A wall does not have to fall to kill people. Sometimes it only has to stand 2 feet wrong. Orla Finch saw that before the cameras did, before the venue director asked for proof, before the next fan wave rolled toward the bridge. The white panel looked straight from the front. At the ground, its foot was offline, and a fresh black wheel arc cut the concrete like a route someone wanted open. Stadium roar pressed over harbor line in one broad animal breath. Flags moved. Vendors called. Families kept walking with drinks sweating in their hands. Nobody screamed. That was what made Orla look lower. Faces lied first. Shoulders told the truth. At the edge of the fan bridge, a row of bodies had tightened without knowing it, each person adjusting half an inch away from a barrier that should not have been there anymore. The next fan wave mattered more than the match clock. It was already gathering beyond the bend, bright shirts and scarves, a calm mass waiting for permission from a route that had become false at ground level. She stepped close enough for the heat off the plastic panel to touch her shin. Dry concrete dust had been pushed into a crescent beneath the foot. The rubber smear was fresh, darker than the old cart marks baked into the apron. The wall looked honest from the front, which was how bad walls got people killed. Orla glanced once at the printed route board and dismissed it. Paper still believed yesterday. The ground did not. 3 yards right, the blue lane held open as a narrow strip of relief, staff only, bright paint worn thin where boots had crossed it all morning. The gap between crowd flow and that lane had shrunk. Lena Pruitt came up on Orla's left with a radio against one ear and the face of a woman who had already been blamed for 3 things before breakfast. Her stadium vest was damp at the collar. "That panel's aligned," Lena said, not arguing yet, just making herself hear it. Orla kept her eyes on the base. "The panel is straight. The base is wrong." A thin voice broke through the local channel, too young and too controlled. "North Bridge Edge is getting quiet," Jessa Pike said. Not stopped, just quiet. Orla looked past the rail. The crowd's conversation had thinned at the shoulder line, not at the mouth. Feet still moved. Breath changed first. Faces are calm, shoulders aren't. Lena turned toward the bridge and saw enough to stop talking. The first response was noise, not obedience. A supervisor in a yellow vest shouted that the bridge was scheduled. Someone on the official channel asked for confirmation twice, then lost half the words under a chant rolling out of the lower bowl. Lena's jaw tightened. She could choose the route map or the woman looking at the floor. Orla did not wait for the choice to become comfortable. Comfort was where crowds died politely. She pointed to the wrong foot of the barrier. "Move the wall." 2 staffers froze, because that command broke the order of things. Contractor first, venue second, consultant somewhere in the polite middle. Orla stepped into the lane before politeness could recover. "Hold the bridge. Hold blue, now." Lena swore once, low and local, then shoved her radio higher. "North Bridge hold. Blue stays open. Do it." The order moved outward in broken pieces, ugly and late, which was still better than clean and dead. The hold rippled badly, which meant it was real. Staff vests turned across the flow. A father with a sleeping child frowned at the sudden stop. A woman laughed, as if the delay had to be a joke, because danger would have announced itself more clearly. Jessa appeared at the far rail, small under the signage, one hand lifted as she tried to slow a section without making it panic. Orla watched the bodies answer the new shape. Pressure eased a little at the shoulder line, then gathered again where the wrong panel still stole space. Behind her, a venue voice demanded a name. Another voice wanted proof. Lena gave neither. Her eyes had gone to the same ground mark Orla had seen. The black arc did not end at the panel. It curved toward the blue lane, a path drawn by something heavier than a person and cleaner than accident. Orla felt the old mistake in her ribs, the seconds between seeing and being believed. Then the route answered before anyone else could. From around the service apron, a white service cart rolled into view, nose angled wrong, tires whispering over the same dark line. No cart belonged there. It was already cutting toward the blue lane, calm as permission, and the lane had no spare breath. The cart came in slowly enough to look harmless, which made Orla distrust it more. A fast mistake warned people. A slow one borrowed permission from everyone watching. Its white nose crossed the painted edge of the blue lane and kept coming, only enough to make two staffers shift their boots backward. The lane was supposed to breathe pressure out of the fan bridge. Now it had a vehicle in its throat. A reversing beep tried to cut through the chance and failed. The tires squealed once on hot concrete, a short rubber sound that matched the black arc under the wall too neatly. Orla saw the line connect in her head: wall foot, wheel smear, cart path, blue lane. The kind of movement that was already happening while people asked whether it was allowed. Lena moved first on the local side because the cart had offended her stadium before it offended any rule. "That unit isn't scheduled on blue," she said. A man beside the cart lifted a laminated pass like a small shield. "Lattice Event Logistics, orange stripe, clean corners. Field adjustment," he called. 2 minutes. Lena gave him a look dry enough to peel paint. If a vendor says just 2 minutes, start counting injuries. The cart nosed deeper. A marshal's reflective vest scraped against the barrier as he stepped back to avoid the front corner. Behind him, the held crowd pressed without meaning to, bodies accepting the delay in inches. Orla felt the concrete vibration change through her soles. The fan wave had not reached them yet, but the bridge was already sending small arguments forward. A shoulder turned, a backpack caught, a breath shortened. The cart had not blocked a lane. It had changed the shape of the crowd. "Hold blue," Orla said. Lena repeated it into her radio. Sharper. "Blue holds." Nobody lets that cart own the lane. The driver kept both hands high on the wheel, a show of innocence so neat it became another warning. He was not confused. The cart rolled along the wheel arc as if someone had drawn it in advance. Orla stepped near the barrier foot, close enough to see grit caught in the rubber smear. Old marks, feathered gray. This one was black at the center. Fresh, a route had been opened here, tested here, then dressed back up as normal. The cart's rear box was blank white, big enough to hide anything from a distance and too obvious to trust up close. If it carried the real problem, Lattice was stupid. If it did not, Lattice wanted Orla looking at it. She did not like either answer. The Lattice man lowered the pass, but did not leave. "We've got clearance from Event Logistics," he said. He had the polished tone of someone trained to sound bored during a fire. 5. Akagord. "You are creating the obstruction." Lena laughed once without humor. Cute. "The obstruction has wheels." Orla watched his eyes, then stopped. Faces were the wrong place again. His feet stayed planted outside the cart path, safe from the line he was defending. The driver's attention kept flicking past Orla, not to the bridge, not to Lena, but toward the service ramp beyond the blue lane. That was the direction the cart wanted to make ordinary. "That cart is a wall," Orla said. "Treat it like one." 2 staffers moved to widen the human line. But the crowd behind them pushed a breath too soon. A vest folded hard against plastic. Someone cursed. The cart did not touch him. It did not have to. Jess's voice broke through the local channel. "North Edge is asking why we stopped." Then, after a beat, one child crying. No panic. Good and bad in the same breath. Orla looked toward the bridge and saw the next wave cresting into sight. Still calm. Bright, obedient to signs that no longer deserved obedience. 5. Agor. The service cart's motor idled with a low shiver through the panel beside her hand. It was a plug. Maybe a decoy. Maybe a test of who would move first. Lena leaned closer without taking her eyes off the driver. Crew badge is local shell, not my morning vendor list. There it was. Not proof, but enough to make the ground uglier. Agate. Orla pointed to the cart's front tire, then the wrong wall foot. Same line. Lena saw it, and her mouth went flat. The official channel opened over them with Grant Weller's strained venue voice, too loud and too clean compared with the sweating lane. Aguada. North Bridge Command. Explain the hold. Another voice. Smoother. Cut in before Lena could answer. This is Cale Stroud with Lattice. We have an approved service adjustment being obstructed at Blue Lane. The cart eased another inch. A staffer's boot slid on concrete grit, and the reflective line bent around the vehicle like fabric pulled over a knee. Orla put one hand out, not on the cart, on the air in front of it. The driver finally looked at her. Stop there. He did, but the pressure behind the lane did not. Grant came back colder. Agagor, clear that lane or reopen the bridge. Cale's voice followed, polite as a closed door. 5. Or, we will have to move through you. Grant Weller's order hit the lane before the cart moved again. Clear that lane, or reopen the bridge. It sounded clean over the official channel. Too clean for the heat coming off the concrete and the staffer rubbing his scraped vest against his ribs. 5. Agater. Cale Stroud's follow-up. Sat under it, like a hand on the back of the cart. Or we will have to move through you. Orla kept her palm in the air in front of the bumper, close enough to feel the motor's low tremor, without touching the machine. Touch gave people stories. Distance gave her room. Behind the cart, the fan bridge waited in disciplined color. Scarves and caps and plastic cups, a crowd still trying to be patient because nobody had told it not to be. That patience was thinning at the edges. A boy cried once, then stopped, because the adults around him were still pretending this was normal. The blue lane bent around the cart's nose. Staff bodies bent with it. The wall foot and the black rubber arc sat in Orla's sightline like the ground refusing to lie. 5. North Bridge Command, Grant said, voice clipped by stadium noise and forced calm. You are holding a scheduled wave inside a broadcast window. Sponsor procession is cued south. Media ingress is stacked behind Gate 4. I need a defensible reason in the next 30 seconds. He was not wrong, which made him more dangerous than a fool. A bad hold could build its own compression. A crowd stopped in one place did not become safe because the reason was noble. It became another object in the route. Orla looked past the cart to the bridge mouth. The front line had slowed cleanly. The second line had not. Shoulders there were negotiating with people who could not see the wall. You have one, she said. The lane is compromised. By you, Cale said. Smooth enough that a casual listener might believe him. Orla ignored the voice and watched the driver's right foot hover above the pedal. Roanvale came on after a delay, his channel thinner, guarded by distance and consequence. Orla. Federal cannot freeze Lattice assets on visual contradiction alone. Not while they are tied to live service movement. He left the rest unsaid. Nekshigat. Freeze the wrong contractor at the wrong second, and the venue lost hands it still needed. Freeze too late, and Cale owned the ground. Agot. There it was, the adult version of no help. I am not asking you to freeze them, Orla said. I am telling you the route is false. Her earpiece clipped hard on the last word, swallowed by a chant rising from the lower bowl. 5. Echo 3. Half the channel dissolved into names, gate calls, somebody asking for repeat, somebody else stepping on the answer. Official radio had gone from authority to weather. In the lane, the cart's motor kept idling, one low note under every official syllable, while staff glanced between their headsets and Orla's hand. Lena heard it too. She pulled her headset down, jammed 2 fingers against the local push, and turned away from the clean channel. Agawit, local mesh, she said. North Bridge, Blue Lane, Service Apron, answer me plain. No titles. 5. What do you see? So the answers came ugly and useful. Blue Edge holding, barely. Bridge front confused. Not pushing. Cart driver looking past Orla. Jessa's voice arrived late, breath tight. 5. Upper rail, can't see the cart box. I've got shoulders turning left, feet still forward. It's not panic. Good, Lena said. Then, because she could not help being herself. Good news, nobody's dead. Bad news. Everyone with a headset hates us. It cut 1 sharp second through the fear and gave the staff something human to stand on. Orla took it and spent it. Lena repeated the command down the local mesh. Agacoin 3. The line of reflective vests stiffened. Not perfect, not enough, but real. Grant came back. Colder now. Again. If you keep the bridge closed, you own the delay. Orla looked at the wrong base. The black arc, the cart nose. Then I own it. Kale did not argue again. That was the part Orla liked least. The lattice man beside the cart lifted 2 fingers toward the driver. Not a wave, not quite a signal, small enough to deny later. Agodi, the cart motor deepened. 3. Its front wheels turned away from the open blue lane and toward the narrow service turn between the temporary barrier and the rail, a space that should have made any sane driver stop and curse. The driver eased forward anyway. Staff shouted. A vest line shifted to hold the crowd back, and the plastic barrier flexed as bodies answered the change before faces understood it. The turn would force the cart through the pinch point, past the wrong wall foot, into the service route beyond. Akufor, Orla stepped sideways, leaving Grant, Roan, and every clean channel behind her. The ground had stopped asking for permission. The cart's front tire kissed the grit at the turn and began to climb into it. The cart stopped pretending to be transport when its front tire entered the turn. It filled the narrow service mouth like a white wall with a motor, too broad for the gap, too patient for accident. It was chai. 5s. The rail ran along Orla's right side, warm metal at forearm height. The temporary barrier pressed the left side of the route. Plastic feet, flexing on gritty concrete. There was no clean place to stand. If Orla stayed clear, the cart owned the turn. If she stepped in wrong, Blue Lane took the cost behind her. The driver kept rolling at a crawl, forcing the decision into inches. 5, hold, Blue, Orla said. Lena's voice carried behind her. Rough through the local mesh. Blue holds. Vests shoulder to shoulder. Nobody follows the cart. Staff moved, not gracefully. Boots slid. Acaded. A woman in a yellow vest braced both hands against a barrier panel as the crowd breathed into it. Orla watched the cart's front corner, the wheel line, the rail, the small pocket of ground where a person could make a vehicle choose. It was barely wider than her stance. It was enough if she got there before the cart found its angle. The work was not brave in any clean way. It was ugly arithmetic. 1 body, 1 rail, 1 panel foot, 1 cart tire, with too much patience. She moved into that pocket before it disappeared. She did not step in front of the cart. That would have given the driver a martyr and Kale a story. She stepped where the turn narrowed, where the cart needed angle more than speed. Her left hand stayed open toward the driver. Agut, her right forearm found the rail as the barrier flexed back into her shoulder. Pain came small and hot, then spread into the joint. The cart's motor strained. The wheels squealed over the same dark rubber line, trying to finish what the first arc had started. Orla did not shove. She set her body where the geometry was already weak and made the cart expose itself. "You do not have that turn," she said. The driver looked past her again, toward the service ramp. Toward someone's one beyond the pinch point. The lattice man shouted, "Clear the adjustment path." Lena snapped back. "That path is eating my lane." The staff line bent, held, bent again. The crowd behind it stayed mostly calm, which only meant the bodies had not yet received the news. A man in a blue scarf lifted his phone, and Lena snapped a vest across his frame without touching him. The cart kept feeding weight into the turn. 5, Agoed. Its bumper did not need to hit anyone. It only needed the staff line to flinch. The cart kissed the barrier. Agoed. Plastic popped against its own foot. Orla shifted half a step, and the rail took her forearm hard enough to flash white through her fingers. Her earpiece tore loose when a staffer's shoulder clipped the cord behind her. It bounced once against her collar and vanished under the cart's sidewash. The official channel died in one soft rip of static. Clean voices had not been helping. Lena saw the wire go and moved closer to cover the gap, using her own body to keep a marshal from backing into the bumper. "Orla's off official," she barked. 5, Akagol. Local stays with me. Jessa came through. Broken, but there. Blue edge still holding. Crowd asking if this is security. "Tell them route maintenance," Lena said. "Boring keeps people alive." Orla heard the line without looking. She had one job now. Make the cart stop without turning the stopped cart into a dam. Her hand had gone numb at the heel. She flexed it once against the rail, felt nothing useful, and used the forearm anyway. The driver tried once more. Akison, worse than fast, he fed weight into the front tires as if he could make the ground agree with him. The cart's rear box swayed, 5 blank and white and too large in everyone's vision. Orla let it come until the front corner had no good angle left. Then she stepped back toward the rail and pointed to the barrier foot with her open hand. 5. Agasod every nearby vest and every nearby phone could see the same thing. The cart could not make the turn without riding the wrong wall line. The driver braked. The stop was ugly. The motor dipped, the wheels scraped, and the rear of the cart shuddered sideways, blocking half the service mouth. Staff shouted at once. The crowd answered with a confused ripple. Lena held the blue line by voice and shoulders, hauling 2 vests back into place. Orla's forearm burned where the rail had caught it. Her radio hung dead at her belt. Case cracked against the concrete grit. The cart had stopped. It had also told her almost nothing. That was the failure inside the win. The rear box was locked but light in its springs. No weight sag. No guarded silence around it. No human attention staying where a true payload would sit. The lattice man's anger was real, but not deep enough. He was playing the stopped cart for witnesses, not protecting it from Orla. She looked past him toward the service ramp and saw a media deck runner hesitate under the sponsor wrap, then turn away too fast. A second lattice vest followed, not toward the blocked cart, but up the shadowed route under the deck. Lena saw Orla's gaze move. What? What? Orla flexed her bruised hand and felt grit bite into her palm. "Wrong wall," she said. Jessa's voice came thin over local. "I've got movement under media. Can't see what they're carrying." The cart sat dead in the turn, big and useless and successful in the worst possible way. The words landed in Orla's mouth with the taste of concrete grit. Wrong wall. The cart sat dead in the turn. huge and bright and useless, while every eye that mattered had been pulled toward it. Staff watched the blocked bumper. Echoed Grant's channel, half dead at Orla's belt, still spat fragments about delay and broadcast stack. The crowd held because Lena was holding it, not because the route was safe. Orla flexed her bruised forearm and felt the rail mark burn under her sleeve. She had stopped a real hazard. Akazik. That was what made it ugly. The cart would have bent Blue Lane into a bad shape if she had let it through. Kale had not lied about needing movement. He had simply given her the movement that shouted loudest, E5. Her correct call had become his cover. That made the failure sharper than a mistake. She had done the right thing and still given him the seconds he needed. Beyond the stopped cart, under the media deck, the sponsor wrap threw hard light over a service gap. Orla had not been allowed to watch long enough. Macker. Two lattice vests moved there with the clean impatience of people who knew the crowd was looking somewhere else. Lena came in beside her, breath hard, radio tight in one fist. She saw the empty weight of the cart's rear box almost at the same time Orla did. Its spring sat too high. No guarded hands stayed on it. No one glanced back with the small panic people gave a true payload. "Tell me that thing isn't what we broke our teeth on," Lena said. Orla did not answer. She looked at the wall foot again, then at the bend of the rubber arc, then beyond the service turned toward the deck. The line had not ended at the cart. It had made the cart visible. Lena's face changed. Recognition hit before guilt could dress itself up. "The wall moved politely," she said, and her voice went flat around the last word. Orla turned. Aguither, Lena was already reaching for the local channel, moving before she finished hating herself. "I signed the late adjustment," Lena said, low enough that only Orla could hear. "Temporary barrier cleanup after sponsor load-in. I didn't walk the final placement." No plea, no long apology. She shoved a marshal toward the blue line with her free hand. "Pull two vests off the dead cart. Watch the media ramp. That's worse," Orla said. Lena nodded once, because there was no time to be forgiven. Her guilt had shape now. A barrier approved on paper, a foot changed on concrete, a cart path dressed as service work. Actually, Orla could use shape. She stepped away from the stopped cart, leaving the victory where it was, because keeping it had already cost too much. Her broken radio case knocked against her belt with each step. Official voices kept trying to find her and failed. "Jessa," Lena called. 5 eyes to media deck service gap, not the camera platform under it. A pause came back, filled with crowd roar and somebody breathing too close to a mic. "I've got 2 orange stripes," Jessa said. "Maybe 3. One hard case between them. Waist height, black corners. Can't see the front." Cam Ivor's voice cut in from somewhere nearer the credential table, thin with panic and too much knowledge. 5. "If it has black corner guards and a yellow custody sleeve on the handle, it shouldn't be moving outside controlled handoff." He stopped himself before the explanation became a lecture. "No, 5. Orla felt the impatience in her own jaw and cut it down. "Is it physical?" she asked. "Yes. Hard case. Seal sleeve visible. Not supposed to leave the credential room without 2 named escorts." That was enough. Not a system. Use free. Not a file. An object in the wrong hands. Kale's voice returned. 5 polished over the local mess through some borrowed channel or open speaker near the ramp. "Maintain the service correction. Do not interfere with authorized media movement." He did not sound angry. That was the confirmations Orla hated most. He had gained ground. He had bought it with her competence and paid in seconds she could not get back. Under the media deck, The hard case shifted into camera light, just long enough for the sponsor wrap to flash across its edge. Agavive. People above would see staff movement. Cameras would see a crowded service area. If Orla lunged now, if Lena threw bodies at it now, they would look like the ones creating chaos beside a live broadcast path. The case moved under public optics, protected by the lie of being visible. Orla felt the old late-call fear press under her ribs. 5, then cut it down to what could move. Blue stays held, she said. Media gap next. Lena turned with her, already pulling staff off the dead cart. The guilt in her face did not slow her hands. If anything, it made them meaner and faster. The stopped vehicle cooled behind them, useless and successful. While the real route walked into the light where nobody could touch it cleanly. The media deck did not hide the route. It made the route respectable. The hard case moved beneath a strip of camera light, carried between two lattice vests who looked like staff doing an unpleasant job, not men stealing time from a crowd. Sponsor wrap gleamed along the service wall, turning every movement bright and flat. Above them, a camera platform hummed on its mount. Below, the crowd noise rolled through concrete and steel until the ramp seemed to breathe. Orla came out from the dead cart line with Lena half a step behind her and no official radio worth listening to. So. Her forearm throbbed. Her shoulder had started to stiffen. The broken earpiece cord dragged against her collar like a small, useless leash. She saw the case again. Black corner guards. Yellow custody sleeve. Hard edge riding against a man's thigh. It was not data. It was weight, location, custody, hands. And the small fear in the carrier's grip. It was also already inside a place where the wrong grab would look worse than the right delay. The camera did not show truth. It showed timing. Whoever owned the frame for the next 15 seconds owned the story for the next 15 minutes. Cale Stroud stood near the sponsor stanchion, as if he belonged to the light. Not behind a screen. Not safely away. His suit jacket was gone, his sleeves clean, his credential. Lanyard turned so the orange stripe faced outward. 5. He did not carry the case. He did not need to. A floor captain at his left used one shoulder to narrow the service path, guiding the two case carriers toward the ramp under the media deck. Cale looked at Orla and Lena the way a man looked at a spill he expected someone else to mop. Clear the service line, he said. 5 Agord. You have already created one obstruction. Orla kept moving. The nearest camera shifted a few degrees. Small sound, big consequence. If she crossed hard now, the frame would catch Orla breaking into a controlled route while Lattice carried a case under authorized badges. Axite. Truth did not matter inside a bad angle. Not yet. Camera light was a cage, and Cale knew exactly where its bars landed. Agor 3. The floor captain drifted sideways, polite contact first, hip and shoulder after. 5. Stealing the strip of ground Orla needed, without giving the camera a shove to love. His badge stayed flat. His palms stayed open. Everything about him said procedure while his body took the route. Lena read the same trap in local language. Sponsor wrap makes a blind bite after the stanchion, she said under her breath. Camera sees the ramp mouth, not the turn under it. She pointed without pointing, a thumb against her radio hand, toward a strip where grip tape darkened near the rail and the service route pinched before widening under the deck. 5. Where sound flattened and sight lines broke. Crew uses it for dead cable bins. Nobody parks there during match flow. Orla's eyes followed the line. Case carriers, stanchion, camera mouth, blind bite, narrow rail, dead space, beyond. There was a choke there. Not safe, useful. Aguirre. If the case entered it and the team held both sides, visibility could become witness after the stop. Before that, it only made Orla the problem. A lattice shoulder cut across her path. Orla checked her step to keep from turning it into a scene Cale could own. The pause cost 3 yards of case movement. It felt larger because the concrete under her boots carried the fan wave in small tremors. Lena was not as lucky. Ekaswix. The floor captain shifted hard enough to force her into the rail. Metal touched her hip. Her vest scraped the sponsor wrap with a dry public sound, and the case carriers passed in the space that contact bought. Lena caught herself before her shoulders snapped back. The restraint cost her half a step and gave Cale exactly that much room. 5. Agager. A loggerized movement, Cale said. No speech. No heat. Just a label trying to become fact. Agazort. Orla saw Cam Ivers near the credential table beyond the camera spill, white around the mouth, staring at the sleeve on the handle like it had grown teeth. He lifted one hand, stopped himself, then flattened it against his own chest. Not here, the gesture said. Or maybe I cannot. Jessa came through the local mesh, broken by crowd noise. Fee 5. Agagud, blue still holding. Bridge wants release. Media side. I've got glare. I can't see their feet. Fallible, honest. Akago. Late enough to hurt. Orla backed one step because forward was blocked and sideways would hand Cale the frame. Agabo, she let the loss happen where she could use it. Lena, she said low. Who can move wall pieces under media without looking like a fight? Lena's breathing sharpened, then steadied. 5. Maintenance gray. 2 from cable. 1 from signage. They owe me. Get them to the blind bite. No rush. No heroics. Quietly. The case moved another yard, bright under the camera and untouchable for that yard. Then, it neared the place the camera could not fully understand. Orla looked at the choke, the rail, and the useless shine of the sponsor wrap. She saw the first shape of a trap that would only work if everyone moved before the frame knew what it was watching.
There was no time to explain the trap without killing it. Explanations needed clean channels, patient faces, quiet hands. Orla had none of those. The case was moving toward the blind bite under the media deck, bright at the edges, untouchable in the camera line, and Cal's people were beginning to read her hesitation as weakness. That was useful if it lasted 1 breath and fatal if it lasted 2. She raised 2 fingers low at Lena, not high enough for the camera platform to like the gesture. Gray to the rail, cable to the blind side, signage at blue. Lena was already moving. She took the order apart and sent it through the local mesh in stadium language, fast and ugly. Maintenance gray, rail bite, cable dead bin mark. Signage blue lane shoulder. If anyone asks, you're fixing what lattice broke. Staff answered in fragments. A breath, a yes, 1 curse. The sponsor wrap shivered as 2 maintenance workers in gray slid a plastic panel on its feet, trying to make a wall look like housekeeping. Orla watched their hands, not their faces. Hands told her whether fear had found the bones yet. 1 gray worker looked at the case too long. Lena barked his name and his hands went back to the panel. Lena put people where the blue lane could survive being useful. Not wide, not pretty, enough. 2 vests at the rail, 1 behind the movable panel, 1 where the fan bridge pressure would hit first if the wave arrived badly. She did not confess now. She spent guilt as placement. Blue line, give me ribs, not elbows, she said. You shove with elbows, people see a fight. You hold with ribs, people see staff. Jessa came in over the mesh, voice thin under the crowd roar. Media side, I have the case carriers at the light edge. 1 floor captain with them, Cal still by the stanchion. A camera operator, older male voice, cut in after Lena dragged him onto the local channel. Camera sees the ramp mouth, not the bite. Sponsor glare wipes the lower feet. That was the first honest thing any camera had said all day. Orla looked to Cam Ivers across the service strip. He had managed to move closer without entering the frame, shoulders hunched around his credential lanyard. Cam, she said, only what you can see, he swallowed. Yellow custody sleeve, black guards, two-handle case. Right object, wrong escort. That's all I can say from here. Enough. Not clean, usable. Orla hated how much of field work lived in that gap. The case carriers neared the blind bite before the wall pieces were ready. One maintenance worker's boot slid on grip tape, and the panel dragged loud enough for 3 heads to turn. Orla felt the trap wobble in the sound. Cal felt it too. His chin shifted, small and sharp, toward the floor captain. The captain answered by stepping the carriers forward, speeding the case without making it look like a run. Authorized movement, Cal called again, but now the words had less patience in them. Orla could not wait for the panel to settle. She pointed to the gray worker closest to the rail. Move the wall, not final, not loud, a setup command low enough to become labor instead of challenge. The worker pulled. The plastic foot screamed softly over grit. The panel moved 4 inches, then 6, then stopped crooked because the rail bit into its base. Good enough to make a channel, not good enough to hold one. Jessa came back too fast. Clear at the bite. Clear, I think. The last 2 words arrived too late to save the first one. Orla saw the problem before Jessa corrected it. The sightline was blocked by a cluster of staff shoulders, not empty floor. A false clear, an honest mistake. It cost seconds and sent one cable worker half a step wrong before Lena grabbed the back of his vest. The worker stumbled into the dead bin, caught it with his knee, and shoved it short of the mark. The trap lost its clean edge before it ever had one. Clear, Orla said. Incomplete. She trusted the girl more because the call had failed out loud. Perfect reports were how bad systems lied. The floor captain used those seconds. He waved the carriers past the camera mouth and toward the narrowing route, where the wall would either become a trap or another mistake paid for by the crowd. Lena shoved one vest 2 feet left and put her own body in the gap he left. Blue holds, she said, and this time the line answered with breath instead of words. Cam raised a hand, not waving, just marking the case with his body for Orla's eye. The maintenance panel jerked again under gray hands. Cable staff dragged a dead bin just enough to make a soft edge near the rail. Signage moved a stanchion that had pretended to be decorative until it mattered. The trap was forming in public, badly and fast. Then the stadium changed under them. Not with sirens, with feet. A deeper roll came through the fan bridge. A packed rhythm of people released somewhere upstream or no longer willing to wait. Jessa's voice cracked through the mesh. Wave is moving. Front edge is coming now. The wall was not stable. The case was not stopped. The crowd had started anyway. Orla felt control leave her hands and come back smaller, meaner, shared among people who could all be wrong at once. The final wave did not arrive as panic. It arrived as obedience. That was worse. People came forward because the line had always moved forward, because signs still pointed forward, because the crowd behind them trusted the backs in front. Concrete vibration rose through Orla's boots and into her bruised forearm, a dull shared pulse under the fan bridge. The sound changed from roar to pressure. Not louder, denser. Conversations flattened. Plastic cups tilted close to chests. Scarves brushed necks. A boy on a man's shoulders leaned to see the delay and smiled because nobody had taught him what a bad route looked like. Orla stood near the half-set panel and watched bodies become physics without becoming monsters. They were fans, families, workers, people trying to reach a match. Their danger came from shape, not malice. Blue holds, she said into the local mesh, clipped and low. Her broken earpiece gave her nothing back. Only fragments from Lena's channel bouncing through someone else's speaker. Blue holds, Lena echoed louder. The vest line took the words into ribs and boots. It barely held. Barely was still holding. The difference was no wider than a boot sliding back and finding grip before the body behind it arrived. The case came out of the camera mouth at the same time. The front of the wave reached the wrong geometry. Cal's floor captain had one hand near the lead carrier's shoulder, not touching enough to look like force. Guiding hard enough to own the route. Cal stayed close behind, sleeves bright under sponsor glare, no speech, no wasted anger. The case's black corner guard knocked once against a stanchion as the carrier adjusted his grip. Cam flinched at the sound, then forced himself to look. Same case, he said through the local channel. Yellow custody sleeve still on the handle, seal band visible. It should not be in this route. That was all, no system, no lecture. The object was wrong because of where it was and who held it. Jessa broke in over him. Bridge front slowing, I can't see feet past the flag group. Shoulders turning right, maybe right. I don't have the lower line. Imperfect. Useful. Orla looked over the crowd edge and saw the same turn rising through bodies, not yet a crush, not yet visible to cameras, but enough to tell her where the next pane would form. Lena had taken the blue lane as if she meant to keep it by personal insult. One shoulder against a staffer, one hand on the movable panel, she directed people without letting herself become the story. Ribs in. Let them see open lane. Don't chase the cart. Don't chase the case. Her voice roughened on the last order because the case was passing close enough for every trained instinct to want to grab. The wrong grab would pull the crowd crooked. Orla saw the choice with ugly clarity. Move the panel too early and the wave would fold into the narrow edge. Move it late and Cal's root would pass through the final gate before the trap had teeth. The wall pieces were still not square. The cable bin sat 6 inches short of where it needed to be. A signage worker shoved it with his hip and nearly lost his footing on concrete grit. The panel flexed. The blue line breathed out, then in, as the first rank of fans touched the delay and translated it backward by inches. One staffer lost half a step and recovered against Lena's shoulder. Lena absorbed him without looking, as if her body had become part of the barrier system she had failed to recheck. The final gate stood beyond the choke, open enough to tempt movement, narrow enough to punish it. Cal saw the same opening. The floor captain pushed the carriers toward it. Orla moved with them, not ahead, not behind, close enough to keep the case in her side vision and the crowd in her bones. Her shoulder strain pulled when she lifted a hand. She ignored it. Pain was information with no voting rights. The camera platform hummed above the media deck. Its angle caught the case, the sponsor shine, the staff line, none of the true danger yet. The frame still did not understand the floor. The floor did. Grip tape under Orla's boot, rail to her right, blue lane breathing thin to her left, wall foot crooked ahead, case entering the final approach. Jessa said, front edge is at the panel. Her voice had lost the thin polish of reporting and gained the rough edge of seeing too much at once. A breath later, no, wait, left side stopped, right side still walking. There it was, the split. Cam's voice came small but steady. Case is at the final gate marker. Lena dragged the nearest vest back with her elbow and held the lane by sheer refusal. The floor captain angled the case toward the gap Cal wanted. The wall stood wrong by inches, which was enough to kill or save. Orla saw the final move arrive before permission could. One choice would feed bodies into compression. One would kill the root. The case reached the wall position, and there was no more room for almost. The case reached the wall position as the front of the wave reached the split. For 1 second everything held in pieces that hated each other. The blue lane was thin and breathing. The movable panel sat crooked under gray hands. The final gate stood open like a promise it could not keep. Cal's floor captain drove the carriers toward the gap with one hard shoulder. Cal stepped into the final zone then, fully visible beneath the camera light, no longer letting other people carry all the risk for him. He did not grab the case. He placed himself beside its root and made his body part of the permission. That was his commitment. Orla saw it, then stopped looking at him. Men who wanted to own a root always believed the root was about them. It was never about them. It was about where bodies could go when panic had not yet learned its own name. Jessa's voice broke through the local mesh. Left side stopped, right side still moving. Blue line is bending. The crowd did not scream. The crowd leaned. Shoulder into shoulder. Cup against chest. Child's shoe tapping a man's collarbone. The bad shape had arrived. It did not announce itself as disaster. It arrived as 1,000 small agreements made in the wrong direction. Lena held the blue lane with the kind of strength that looked like refusal until it became architecture. Her hip pinned one panel foot. Her left hand pulled a staffer back from chasing the case. Ribs, she said, hoarse now. Hold with ribs. The staff line answered by taking the pressure into their bodies instead of their hands. It bent anyway. One vest folded against the rail, then came back because Lena dragged him with her whole shoulder. Her local channel had turned into breath and fragments, names cut in half by crowd noise. A signage worker hauled the stanchion another few inches. face gray, boots slipping on concrete grit. Cable staff shoved the dead bin against the rail, not enough to block people, enough to change the case path. Orla moved into the last pocket of useful ground. Her shoulder barked when she lifted both hands. The rail pressed her forearm bruise alive again. She felt the wall through the panel foot, a vibration traveling up plastic and dust. The wrong move would fold the wave into the narrowing edge. The right move had to steal Cal's gap without stealing the crowd's breath. Cam was close enough now to see the handle, but not close enough to matter yet. "Same case," he said, voice shaking and hard, sleeve visible. "After," Orla said. "Mark it after." Proof could wait its turn. Bodies could not. The floor captain pushed the carriers toward the gate marker. The case corner struck the rail once, a hard, flat knock that made Cam flinch and made Cal look, finally, less polished. Orla saw the opening shrink to inches. Inches were where walls told the truth. She looked once at Lena. Lena's jaw was clenched, eyes wet from effort or heat or guilt that had finally found a job. She nodded barely. Jessa came through again, not clean, not perfect. Right side still walking. Blue still open. I think the last two words stayed honest. Orla used the honesty. She set her palms against the hot plastic. One on the shifted panel, one in the air toward gray and signage and cable. The camera caught her now, let it. The case was close enough to the dead-end route that the frame would have to learn the floor after the floor was done. Orla drew one breath through the stadium heat. Move the wall. The panel shifted on its feet. Plastic scraped concrete. The rail shuddered. Lena drove her shoulder into the line and the staff moved with her. For half a second the blue lane buckled so hard Orla thought she had chosen late. Then the panel found its angle. The crowd's front edge redirected left into open space instead of folding right into the gate. The case carriers tried to follow Cal's gap, but the gap was gone. One carrier planted a boot to force the angle, found only the dead bin edge, and lost the case weight into the rail. The hard case hit the dead bin edge, bounced against the rail, and stopped in full view. For a heartbeat, nobody understood what had won. Then the root died visibly. The case sat jammed in the dead-end bite, yellow sleeve up, black corner guard against metal, carrier hands still on it because they had nowhere left to go. Cal stopped beside it, too exposed to call the stop and adjustment. The floor captain looked for another line and found only people watching. Camera light washed over the case after it had already been stopped. That mattered. It witnessed a fact the field had created, not a rescue it had delivered. Roan Vale's voice came through Lena's channel at last, late and careful. "Federal containment moving to final gate. Hold the case where it is." Orla almost laughed, but her shoulder hurt too much and the crowd was still alive, which took all the room. Grant's voice demanded status. Lena looked at the held blue lane, the delayed fans, the stopped case, the wall standing exactly where Orla had told it to stand. "Status is ugly," she said. "Ugly is fine." Around them the stadium still roared, unaware of how close its own order had come to killing people. Fans were angry now, confused, sweating, alive. Staff kept the lane open. A mother cursed the delay while pulling her child closer. A vendor sat on a crate and shook so hard his cap slipped sideways. Cam pointed at the case for Roan's people only after the stop was real. Cal said nothing. His silence was the cleanest thing he had offered all day. Orla did not need his confession. Lena looked at the wall, then at the review she was already going to face, and stayed where she was. A young maintenance worker, both hands still on the panel, looked at Lena and then at Orla. "Which wall moves next?" Orla flexed her bruised hand, felt the concrete grit under her palm, and looked back toward the crowd that had not died. The one people still believe.